Morning, everybody. I think we're going to get started now. So welcome to the Integrating with Windows talk, focusing on file type associations, protocol associations in AutoPlay. My name is Anshul Rawat. I'm a program manager lead working on the Windows user experience team. We've had an amazing time working on Windows 8 so far, and I'm super excited to be here talking to you about some of the work our team has been doing. A lot of the work you've already seen in the keynote and across the days so far. My focus is going to be talking about specific aspects of the association model going forward in Windows 8. So what we're going to cover today, here's a quick agenda. I'm going to walk you through the end user experience, the user model of file type association, protocol association, and autoplay. And what I mean by that is, from the consumer's perspective, the end user's perspective, when they interact with content or devices on their PC, what is the experience that they're going to go see where your applications are going to get promoted by Windows, where they can choose them as potentially default handlers to consume that content. We're going to establish that user model, and then we're going to switch towards, from a developer perspective, what is it the work required of you as app developers to make sure your applications are participating in that model. So I'm hoping by the time we're done here today, you not only have a good understanding of what the user model looks like, how the end users are going to be seeing your applications in these states, but also what the work that's required of you as app developers and the guidelines and some of the specifics around that for you to have a good understanding of. So when we think about associations and this overall model, this talk is broken down into 5 different aspects. I'm going to talk about the overview in terms of the user model, and then we're going to switch over to developer-specific aspects of this model. Those are the topics there in green. We're going to talk about how do you register your application to show up and make sure it can participate in the user model that I'm going to talk you through. Once your application is selected as the default handler for a specific type, what is the work that you have to do, the guidelines, when your application gets activated, and some of the updates there. We're also going to touch a little bit on launching, which is if your application needs to launch another application to handle a specific default. A scenario is maybe there's a file type your application can't natively handle. So how do you go open the default handler on that PC to be able to consume that content and provide the user an end-to-end experience? And last, we're going to talk a little bit about managing file types. Now, I know there are a few who may have applications that do this today as part of your app experience. What are the updated guidelines for these existing applications and desktop applications going forward? What you're going to notice as I go through the talk, much of this talk is focused on Metro-style applications. And primarily the reason for that is most of the guidelines for desktop applications or your existing applications hasn't changed from Windows 7, sorry. There are some updated guidelines, and that's what I'm going to touch around the managing aspect when we get to that part of the talk. So let's start off with going through the user experience. So one thing you've noticed right from the keynote to the big picture session and some of the other sessions you may have attended is Windows 8 is about putting the user in control of their PC. That means not only aspects of the system like being able to personalize my start screen, but also involves other aspects of the system like choosing what the default handler for a specific file type may be. So if I'm a user and I have a bunch of media content on my PC, like MP3 files I want to consume, Windows will now put the user in control to decide how they want to consume that content. I'm going to walk you through examples of what that user experience looks like. What you're going to see is Windows now provides one consistent user experience independent of where the user is in Windows, whether I'm immersed in a Metro-style application or I'm using Windows Explorer on the desktop. When I try to consume new content, Windows with one consistent and predictable UI will now show the user all the list of applications that can handle that specific file type or protocol, and is going to ask the user, putting them in control on how they want to consume that content. What this also means for you as app developers, in the past you may have had to do work as part of your application to promote these specific scenarios. By providing one consistent experience across Windows, we will make sure that we've removed the burden from you, the app developer, from having to go build custom UI to have to do this in the past, and also make sure that independent of where the user is, in context to that experience, Windows will now promote your application when the user tries to consume content you support. So I'm going to walk through a quick user experience, a demo experience of what this looks like. So I'm going to switch to a demo PC here. This is the Samsung preview hardware that all of you are using right over here. I'm actually going to go to Windows Explorer. And the way this PC is set up, think of it as a PC that I've just acquired. I haven't actually consumed any content on it. I've acquired a bunch of MP3 files, which are stored in my music library. This is tracks from Wiper Creek Club, who hopefully you guys had a chance to watch last night. And as an end user, when I go and try to consume this content for the very first time, what you're going to notice is Windows is now going to ask me. Windows knows that I've never consumed MP3 content on this PC before. There are a class of applications that are available on this PC that can handle this content. So Windows, putting me, the user, in control, will now ask me. What you're going to notice here in this UI is there are two applications being shown here. There is Music, which is a Metro-style application that I've pre-installed on this PC. And there's Windows Media Player, which is an existing desktop application that you guys are mostly familiar with. So here in this UI, it's one consistent experience. There's no differentiation between Metro-style applications or desktop applications. It's essentially all the type of all applications on this PC that can handle and have registered to handle MP3 file type. So from an end user perspective, if I was to say, hey, I really want this content consumed in this Music Metro-style application, I can just make that selection, and seamlessly I'm transferred to that application consuming this content. So there again, one seamless experience in context of me, the user, trying to consume content on this PC. Windows puts me in control, shows me the applications that are able to access this content type, and I make a decision, and Windows respects that decision going forward. So I've talked a little bit about file type association there in that example. I'm also going to talk a little bit about AutoPlay here from an experience model. So we've spent a lot of time in Windows 8 trying to make sure there's a consistent experience across all the association models, whether it's file type, whether it's protocols, or whether it's content or device associations for AutoPlay. So to illustrate that example, I have a memory key drive here. I've acquired some MP3 content on this key drive, and I'm going to actually insert this into this demo PC. What you're going to notice is, as part of Windows recognizing that drive, I'm going to move my mouse there to highlight that, Windows actually is now going to promote to the user saying, hey, there's new content that's available. Now I'm immersed in a Metro-style application. Windows tells me, hey, there's a new storage device that's available. Do you want to interact with that content right now? And without having to leave my immersed experience in this Metro-style application, I can act on that notification, and Windows brings up the AutoPlay experience for that device type. So here, the default options for a storage device are being able to open this folder, setting it up for a backup, or choosing to take no action going forward. But if there were a class of applications that were installed on this PC that could also act on a storage volume of this type, that list of applications would have also shown up here. So since I've acquired some new content, I'm going to choose to open folders. And what you're going to notice is Windows seamlessly transitions me to Windows Explorer, and I'm navigating to content on that drive. So again, a very consistent experience from what you saw for the file type association model with what's the model for AutoPlay now going forward. Now here, when I wanted to consume this content, there's additional MP3 content here, some more tracks from Wiper Creek Club right at the top. Since in the previous step I've already told Windows my intent on how to consume MP3 content, when I consume this additional MP3 content that's on this drive, Windows will seamlessly just take me to my application. In the past, I've already declared that I want to consume this in this Music Metro-style application, and as a result, in the future, as I consume more of that content, Windows will respect that decision and just open the content in that. So you notice the glow track that I'd selected there got added to the queue of the Music Metro-style application there. So there is a quick example of the consistency in the model between the AutoPlay and what we had for file type association and putting the user in control. Now, there are always instances where you may actually have content that just for that single instance you want to open in a different type of application. I may have photos that I acquire on a regular basis. Typically, I want to see those photos in my photo viewer, but for this one instance, I actually want to go edit this photo in a different application. So that's something that's also baked right into the system here. And an easy way of doing that action is actually through Windows Explorer using the new ribbon UI. So in the previous example, you saw if I double-click the Glow file, I was seamlessly taken to the Metro style application. But if I wanted to open this content in a different application, in the Windows Explorer ribbon, which you can see here, with using the open command here from the ribbon, I can see all the list of applications that are available that can handle this content type. And I can also choose to change the default going forward to make that decision right from here. So I can choose to bring up that open with UI that I had used the first time around to set this association. And I can either say that, hey, I can choose an application just for this single instance, or actually even go change the default going forward to potentially maybe open this content in Windows Media Player by selecting the check mark there saying use this for the future for all MP3 types and selecting the new application. What you notice in this UI also is Windows also is telling me what is the currently registered default for this content type, which happened to be that music Metro style application. So there I've just given you a quick rundown on the overview of the UI model around the association model going forward in Windows 8. So should probably grab that. What you noticed was there was one single experience that was provided to the user in terms of the association model, independent of where they were. It didn't matter whether the applications I had on the system were Metro-style applications or desktop applications. The one consistent UI showed me the entire list of applications that were on that PC that could handle that specific type. I also showed you where Windows 8 is putting the user in control now, where the user gets to decide how they want to consume this content. And as a result, if your application is the one the user chose, other applications cannot override that notion there. It's the user who is in control, and it's only the user who gets to decide how they want to consume the content going forward. So we've talked a little bit about the overall user experience model. Let's talk about how do you actually get your applications to show up in that list. What's the work required of you as app developers to ensure that you can register for these associations? Now, in the past, in Windows 7, if you're familiar with the association model, you would have to write a bunch of code as part of your installer. You potentially may have to ask the user, as part of your installer experience, here are the file types I support. Here's a list. Select the ones that you want as the default for my application type. Based on the user selection, as part of the installation process, you would actually have to go make sure that you register for all those associations. And the inverse was also required of you during the uninstall time. So during the uninstall experience, you would also have to make sure that you removed your associations to make sure that you didn't leave the user in a broken state. Now, with the model I just showed you, putting the user in control and using that one consistent experience, the big difference you're going to notice in Windows 8 is there's absolutely no installer code for you to write going forward. A file type, protocol, and AutoPlay associations going forward are declarations for Metro-style applications that you just define as part of your app manifest. So as you're creating your application package going forward, similar to how you may be declaring other capabilities for your applications and declarations like search, share, you're also going to go declare the file types, the protocols, and AutoPlay tasks that your application supports as part of that manifest. And Windows will do all the work for you to make sure that when your application package is installed by Windows, it will go register for all those associations. We'll make sure that your application is promoted to the user when they try to consume that content in context. And I'm going to walk through an example of that here. And during uninstall time, Windows will make sure that it removes your associations that you've declared. And in case your application was the default, it will use the consistent UI to ask the user to choose a new default going forward. So let's walk through a quick demo of what you would do in Windows 8 in comparison to Windows 7 to set these declarations. So I'm going to close the Explorer window, and I'm going to open up a sample package here. Now, the sample application that I'm using is actually the association launching SDK sample that's available to all of you. So if you wanted to play around a lot more with what I'm showing you here today, feel free to download this SDK sample if you haven't already from the Dev Center, and you're going to be able to do exactly what I've done here today. So I talked about how you declare this as part of your app manifest. So you can, we're going to open up the manifest for this sample application. I'm going to go to the Declarations tab. And since I haven't made any declarations for the sample application, what I'm going to do is pull down this, the declarations UI to show me all the list of declarations that are available on this PC. Let me just zoom in there for folks in the back. What you're going to notice is as all the declarations available as part of my manifest, AutoPlay content task, AutoPlay device tasks, file type associations, and protocols are shown as part of available declarations I can define for my application manifest, from my application manifest. So for the sake of this demo, let's use file type associations. Since I showed you the MP3 demo and what that experience around it was, what we're going to do here as part of this demo, we're going to have my sample application register to be the default handler for MP3 file types as well. And we'll walk through what that experience looks like. So right off the bat, in the manifest editor here, which makes it super easy for you to see what are the required fields required as part of the declaration. So anything with a red exclamation mark is either an error in the manifest that hasn't been populated correctly, or it's a field that's required. So if all I wanted to do was to state that my application supports MP3 file type, all I needed to do was go into that name tab, specify a name for my associations, and add the supported file type, and I was done. So all the other fields that you're seeing here, like display name, logo, and info tip, are actually optional fields, but I would highly encourage you to populate those as well to make sure the end user gets the best possible user experience around these. So the display name, let's walk through each one of these properties. The display name is the type that will be shown, the text that will be shown in the type column in Windows Explorer if you're for file types that you support. An example of this here, if we go back to Windows Explorer and I open up that music content here, the type column here is what that reflects back to. So if I stated as part of my sample application, this was MP3 type or this was media type, when my application was the default for these MP3 tags, that's what would be shown here in Windows Explorer. So let's go back to our project there and say, let's say this is MP3 type, because that's what we're going to be registering as part of this demo. The logo is the logo that will be shown on your file types in Windows Explorer again when your application is the default. So if you can, the logo is optional here, because if you choose not to specify a logo, your application logo as part of your manifest will be used by default. But again, if your application supports multiple file types like MP3, video content, picture content, you may want to specify a specific logo for each one of those types so the user can differentiate between the content on that PC. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to type images, tile.sdk.jpg on purpose. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually specifying a file that's part of my application package. If you notice here on the right, where my mouse is, the images folder is where I have a bunch of PNG files that I can use as part of my logo, and I'm just in the manifest editor specifying a path to use as my logo. I purposely wrote JPEG there because as soon as I navigate away from it, you're going to notice the manifest editor has stated that, hey, there is an error here, because it's validated against that images folder to see if this file, the logo file exists, and since it doesn't, it's warning me about that. So I'm going to correct that by changing it to PNG, because that's what's there as part of that folder. And as you notice, the error goes away. The info tip is the tooltip that's shown again in Explorer for your file type. So when I hover over this ELIZA track, supported audio type, that's the info tip that field is referring to if you want to specify that. So let's say it's a media type file, just for the sake of this, and the name. So the name is a unique identifier that you provide for your file type associations. Your application can support multiple file types, and if you are specifying multiple file types, like if I wanted to specify MP3, WMA, and a bunch of other media content that I want to register for, the name here is a unique value for all of those types that have the same display name, logo, and info tip. So that's how Windows will package it and make sure across upgrades and stuff, that information for those specific types stays preserved. So let's just call this media types. The one thing to watch out as you play with this is the name field here currently needs to be all lowercase. If you happen to put an uppercase character in there, Visual Studio currently won't warn you. Again, it's a preview edition, but that's, if you're finding errors, that's a likely case why you may be hitting an error. Just you need to make sure that's all lowercase. So I'm not going to go through these edit flags. These exist today in Windows 7, and there's enough documentation on that on MSDN. Let's go to the next supported file types. So content type. Now, if you need to specify a MIME type for your association, that's where you can choose to do so. Again, it's optional completely to you. It's not something that's required, so I'm going to skip through that. And since we're using MP3 files as for the demo purposes here, I'm going to say the sample application supports MP3. And here, I can also choose to add additional file types just by hitting that Add New button if there are more files that I support. So maybe my application also supports WMA files, and I'm able to do that here. So that's it. In a few simple steps there, we're pretty much done declaring all the file types my sample application supports. I don't have to write any additional code. I don't have to worry about how Windows will go set these associations. I am done as a developer in that few lines of work here. So to show that, let's go build this application. So what Visual Studio now is doing is creating my package, building that application, and it's launched my sample app, which is the SDK sample that's available to you as well. We're not going to use the sample just yet, but what I'm going to show you is now I have this application, the sample application, installed on this PC that's registered for MP3 and WMA file types. So I'm going to go back to my Windows Explorer, and I'm going to try to consume my MP3 content again. Now, you remember from our first demo, we've already set the MetroStyle music application to be the default for this. So let's walk through the experience on what happens because there now is a new application available on this PC that can handle MP3 files. So I'm going to select the track here. You'll notice that as soon as I selected that track, my media application was launched, the default that was in the past. But Windows now is informing me in context saying, hey, there are actually new apps available to you to consume this content. Now, this could be a scenario where I may have downloaded as an end user an application from the Windows Store and have installed it. And now the next time I try to go consume media content, Windows will now promote your application as a new application that's available on that PC for the end user to consume that content type. So when I select that notification, Windows now will again show me the same consistent experience I had from the very first time, saying, hey, there is a new application available for you to handle MP3 types. It's the association launching SDK sample that we just created and deployed on this PC. And so when I, as a user, said, hey, that's the application, that's your application I got from the store, I want to go use this content in, all I have to do is simply select that application, and that's it. I'm seamlessly transitioned from the other music MetroStyle application that was my default to the new MetroStyle application, and it looks like we had a slight reboot of Explorer there. I think you guys are familiar with the fact that these are preview builds. So I'm going to try that experience once again to make sure that we can talk about that. And actually, what you notice here already is it's a little tough to see here based on the zoom level here. But I actually specified that SDK sample logo as my default. You notice in Windows Explorer, the logo has also changed to my sample application. It's also registered as the default now for the type. It shows up as MP3 type that we'd populated. And when I hover over it, media type file was the declaration I'd made for this type. So all of that association now has happened here. So when I select this content now, there you go. Now going forward, Windows will now launch my sample application as the default for this specific type. What you notice here in the output here, also for this application in the sample is, I received one file activation required. This is just part of the sample on how we're handling this activation. I received one file, and that was the track that I double-clicked in Windows Explorer that was passed to my application that my application could now consume and act upon. So there, in a few simple steps, what you saw was me declaring the capabilities of my application using declarations, building, deploying that application, Windows promoting that application to the end user, and the user choosing that as the default going forward. Now, I'm going to also talk a little bit about how the model is very similar for AutoPlay with what I just showed you for our file type associations. So we're going to go back to our Visual Studio project. I'm going to close that solution and open another project that I already have. This is another sample application called Auto OpenTap that I've actually already pre-filled with all the declarations for file types in AutoPlay, and I've already installed it on this PC. So I have a file types that I've associated this application with, and I have two AutoPlay content events that I've also registered for this application. The content events that I've registered for here is a camera memory on arrival event, as well as a show pictures on arrival event. Now, all the content events are actually defined as part of the AutoPlay white paper available in MSDN. So if that's something that you want to get a better understanding of, those white papers are available on MSDN for you to see all the content types available. Now, the camera memory on arrival essentially is an event where if I insert a memory card that was being used on a camera into my Windows 8 PC, Windows would recognize that and would make sure that your application that was registered for this specific content event would get shown to the user in AutoPlay. To show that example, I'm actually going to switch my memory card to another memory card, which has been pre-formatted to look as if it came from a camera. It's got a DCIM folder with a bunch of images inside it. And you're going to notice that when I plug in that content, Windows will inform me that there's a new camera storage device that's available. When I act on that notification, Windows will now show me the AutoPlay UI with my application as a potential suggestion to the user to consume that content in, because I've made that declaration. So this is a good place to look at the comparison of what I created as part of my declaration with what actually shows up to the end user in the UI. So I registered for the content event camera memory on arrival. That's what happened in this case. Windows told me, hey, a camera storage device was detected, and hence brought up the AutoPlay dialog. I had defined a verb, the show verb. This is the verb that would be passed back to my application when the user selected my application in the AutoPlay UI. So if I went and selected the show pictures task here in the AutoPlay dialog, my application would get activated, and Windows would pass me the show verb. So the verb there is completely something that you define as a developer. It is to help you disambiguate in what specific scenario your application got invoked in AutoPlay. Since you could support multiple tasks, as you can see in my declarations there, I support two content events. And this verb being passed to me would help me differentiate, my application is getting invoked in the scenario where there was a memory card that was brought into the PC and the user selected my application, as opposed to the show pictures on arrival task that I have specified later. The action display name is the text that's shown to the user in the UI in AutoPlay. So you notice that there in the UI on the right, I have the show pictures text shown up to the user, and that's what I declared in my manifest declaration to be shown as part of defining that. And so you can see here, sorry, you had a question?
Why doesn't the second one show up?
I'm actually going to walk through that scenario specifically. To also answer, the question was, why doesn't the second declaration show pictures on arrival show up? In this specific case, I haven't simulated the pictures coming into the PC yet. I'm only showing a camera storage device, and as a result, that was the declaration that was shown.
How is it knowing pictures that you plugged in?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
How is it knowing that it's pictures that you plugged in onto the device?
How is it knowing that
Does
they're...
it look over the USB key as you plug it in?
So the question is, how did it know that it was a camera storage device? Currently, Windows will go and look for the DCIM folder that's used by most camera devices, and based on that, it knows that it's the camera event here, and as a result, show up that. Now, there's the entire white paper on that for AutoPlay to tell you all about each one of those events and how that Windows does that. So in this case, so that's the declaration. So let's talk about the second declaration I had made there, which is show pictures on arrival. So as part of that, as Windows acquires new content on this PC, when pictures are actually copied over to this PC through different sources, I've registered my application to actually also ask the user if they want to use my application when AutoPlay is invoked in those scenarios. And the verb I've specified there is the tap verb, so I can disambiguate between the camera storage on arrival scenario versus this pictures on arrival scenario. And the reason why I actually have that declaration here for this sample is I wanted to talk a little bit about NFC. There was a talk yesterday by Max Morris about NFC, and what I wanted to talk here specifically about was the fact that if you register your applications for AutoPlay to handle events like show pictures on arrival, events that you can get from the NFC, your application will automatically get promoted to users when they use those specific sensors to transfer content over. So to show that demo, there is an NFC sensor that's built into the Samsung Preview hardware that all of you have. I have another PC here I'm going to quickly switch over to, which has a sample application that's written via which I can initiate an NFC connection and send some content once the NFC connection is initiated over Bluetooth. I've selected two JPEG files on this PC here, my demo PC, to send over Bluetooth using the NFC handshake. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to invoke NFC here by saying somebody nearby to simulate that tap scenario. That PC sadly doesn't have an NFC sensor built in, so I have a prototype dongle that's connected over USB. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to switch over to my developer device here. I'm going to take that dongle here and actually tap it to my NFC sensor in my Samsung Preview hardware. What you're going to notice is Windows now inform me, hey, there's somebody trying to send you content nearby. I've done the handshake. Looks like the handshake didn't work there. No. Let me just try that real quickly again. All right, I think it worked this time around. Because of that prototype dongle a little bit, sometimes the specific part of the demo has a hard time working based on the Bluetooth characteristics as well. But here, so it's actually sent two files after that handshake was done to my PC using NFC, and as a result, when those pictures arrived on this PC, AutoPlay was invoked. Because I had registered my application for show pictures on arrival event, it didn't matter to me how those pictures got onto that PC, whether it was through NFC or whether through some other scenario. Windows will now make sure that your application gets promoted in that specific case. So now you're noticing that the receive pictures AutoPlay task showed up. That was the second declaration I had made there for the show pictures on arrival task. And as soon as those content came over using NFC and Bluetooth, Windows made sure that your application got promoted to the user because you didn't have to worry about NFC. You just wanted to make sure that your application supported the pictures on arrival task, and independent of how the pictures got there, your application is just going to get promoted to the user in that specific scenario. So super easy for you to do. All you needed to do was specify for the right AutoPlay declarations as part of your manifest, and now your application is participating in scenarios that are completely new to Windows 8 as well. So with that, I'm going to do a quick recap of what we just talked about there. The big difference for Windows 8 from a developer perspective is you absolutely have no installer code that you need to write. All you need to do is rely on your manifest and make sure you're specifying the right declarations in your manifest for your file type associations and AutoPlay tasks. You do the exact same thing for protocol associations. I didn't talk through those in the demos, but that was another option that was available to you as part of the declaration tab as part of your manifest. So if it's protocols also that you care about, you go about doing that in the exact same way. The other thing I also showed you is you don't have to specify just a single file type or a single AutoPlay or protocol. You're able to specify multiple file type or multiple associations at the same time in your manifest. And by registering for the right AutoPlay tasks, you can also make sure that you seamlessly start participating in new scenarios in Windows 8, like the NFC scenario, that what I just showed you as well. So we've talked a little bit about what you need to do as app developers to register to make sure your application shows up in this UI. Let's talk a little bit about what you need to do when your application is actually selected by the user as part of this UI. Now, if you're familiar with file type association model in Windows 7, what you may remember is the fact that when your application that gets invoked by the user, you need to use the file paths to get access to that content. For Metro-style applications, the biggest difference that you're going to notice in Windows 8 is the fact that you should not be relying on file paths. File access in Windows 8 for Metro-style application happens through the trust broker as part of the overall security model. And so when your application is invoked, you're going to be passed the storage item for the file type or for the file the user is actually invoked you for. Using that storage item, that's how you get access to that file. And that's what you should be using going forward in your Metro-style applications, not the file paths that you may be using in the past. The main reason for that is even though you get access to that content in that instance through the file path, the path access may not be available to you in the future because of the overall security model. The other thing I also want to talk about here is persisting that storage item. So some of you may have scenarios where you have an MRU list as part of your application, or you're building a playlist queue, like in the example we had with the music player there, where you want to get access to that content across sessions or in the future. To be able to do that in Windows 8, you need to make sure that you're leveraging the storage file APIs to preserve and persist that file item across sessions in case you need to get access to it. Now, there's an entire session on that I have a link to in the end, which talks about the entire file access SDK model and how you can go about doing that. So there's an entire talk on that as well. So I'm not going to go into details on that here. We've also simplified the model of responding to AutoPlay events in Windows 8. So in Windows 8, unlike in the past, in addition to being passed the verb for AutoPlay that you had registered for, we're also going to pass you the root folder of the device content. And then you as an application developer are free to use that root folder to consume the content in any way you want. So here are a few examples from the samples that I've shown you on how we've been doing this as part of that SDK sample. So this code snippet here is from the association launching SDK sample we've been using as a sample app so far. If you remembered when we walked through the building that package and deploying it and launching, when I selected that track 5, I had an output that was shown in my application. That's what's shown here on the top right visually. How I got that output was essentially using this few lines of codes here. Basically, as the event argument that was passed to me was a storage item. Using that storage item, I could query the system for properties of that item, for example, the file name for it, and leveraging that, I was able to display that output, which was, hey, this was track 5 called Soft Spots in the Dark. That was passed to my application when the user selected that in Explorer. Now, I talked a little bit about persisting access to the storage items. This is a code snippet from the file access SDK sample. We haven't used the sample here today, but if this is a scenario that interests you because you're creating an MRU list, for example, what you need to do is preserve that storage item using the API that's shown here, which is simply basically calling Windows using the new WinRT APIs to say, hey, just add this to the most recently list used. Now, if you want more details, there's the link to that session towards the end, but I just wanted to cover it here briefly to make sure that the scenario is completely possible in Windows 8 for you to do. And since we've been talking about similarities in the model between AutoPlay and file association, here's what I could have done for AutoPlay, similar to what I did for that file association sample, where using the event arguments that was passed to me, using that storage item, I could find out that here was the verb that was passed to me, which was import task in the specific case, and the root of the device content folder that was passed to me, which was the FDCIM folder. Again, very similar from a code perspective. Using those the storage items, I'm able to query all these properties around them. So let's talk about launching another application from within your application. So there are scenarios where some of you may have where your application doesn't handle every single file type, and as a result, you may need to launch another application to do so. A common example of this could be a mail type application. I get multiple attachments in mail. There may be some that my mail application can use natively within my app. There's some it may not be able to handle. So how am I, as a developer, able to launch whatever is the default for that specific type from my application? Now, the best way to show this is, again, through another demo. I'm going to switch over to our developer hardware here. I'm going to close this AutoPlay sample that we were using before and go back to using our association launching SDK sample that we've used in the past for the file association case. For the sake of this demo, I'm actually going to run the application in a simulator, just to show you how you can also leverage the simulator to build this, to build applications and test them side by side by making changes within your code. So in this example, I've launched deployed my SDK sample within the simulator as a sample application. Imagine this is that hypothetical mail app that we're talking about, and I received an attachment for a PNG file, a single PNG file that I cannot handle natively in my application. As a result, when the user selects launch default handler, imagine this was the attachment. When I double click that, you're going to notice there's a breakpoint here that I've created. As my application, all I need to tell Windows to be able to allow the user to consume this content and provide an end-to-end seamless experience from my application to this other application is this single API, which is launch default program for a file and providing it the file as an argument. And that's about it. In that single line of code, Windows will now make sure that when we continue here, the default handler, let's switch over to the simulator to actually show this. Oh, there we go. The default handler for that PNG file is just seamlessly launched from my application. In this specific case, I was just using the logo that we used for our file type, which is the Win8 SDK logo. And I, at some point as a user, had specified that the Windows Photo Viewer is how I wanted to consume these PNG files with. And as a result, when I used that API call from my application, Windows just seamlessly opened up that PNG file as in that native application. Now, you may also have scenarios where you, let me just bring that sample here. You may actually want to ask the user and provide them the choice on how they want to consume that content, which your application can't natively handle. I showed you that consistent UI at the start of the talk, and maybe that's what you want to show to the user to say, hey, here's the list of applications that can act on PNG files. You can choose how best you want to consume this content. Now, this could be a scenario where from your application, you may be a photo viewer, but you don't natively support editing photos. And so you may want to provide the user the list of all the editors that are available on that PC, deployed on that PC, for the user to choose how they want to consume that content and not use the default. So in this example, I'm going to click that second button here, which is Launch Open With from my sample application. And what you're going to notice here in the breakpoint here is basically it's the exact same API call as launch the default program for file, but I've provided some additional parameters as part of this call, which is, hey, show the picker. So let the user decide by showing them the picker options. And I've also provided an anchor. The anchor is the XY coordinates, where I would want the user to see this open with dialog when it's invoked from my application. The one thing that you want to remember there is, as part of specifying the anchor, you want to make sure it's in context to where the user clicked within your application, so that the dialog, the UI that comes up is in reference to where they acted. So let's continue from this breakpoint. And what you're going to notice now here is what I was talking about. Now, instead of just opening up this PNG file in the default handler, I, as a developer, have now asked the user from my application to choose how they want to consume this PNG file. As part of that UI, Windows, again, it's that same consistent UI we've been seeing again and again. Windows asks the user, hey, here's a list of applications, tells the user what's the current default, which is listed as keep using Windows Photo Viewer if I wanted to, or for this instant, actually use it in a different application, and all the list of applications that support PNG files are shown to the user. And again, in this specific sample, as you play around with it, the XY coordinates for that anchor I provided was actually my launch open with button, the coordinates for that button, and Windows did the work to make sure that when we showed this UI to the end user, it was in relation to where that button was placed on the screen. So here's the list of APIs, the launcher APIs that I just discussed. I again provided the focus on file type associations, but the same launcher APIs also exist for protocols if that's something that's of interest to you for your specific application as well. So let's talk a little bit about managing defaults in file types and protocols going forward. Now, you've seen what we've talked about from an overall experience model from an end user's perspective, which is in Windows 8, it's the end user in control, right? They get to decide how what applications are going to be used for specific file types. We've also talked about how Windows now is providing one consistent experience independent of where the user is as part of that experience, whether I'm immersed inside a Metro-style application or I'm using Windows Explorer on the desktop. It's one consistent UI that's going to be shown to the user to make that decision. We've talked about how you can provide that UI to the user by launching other applications from your application as well. What this really means now is you, for app developers, we're trying to take on the burden across Windows to provide these scenarios for the user, make sure it's consistent, and not have to worry about writing specific code to go do this. So what that really means is, since the user is control, as an app developer, you don't need to worry about whether you're the default or set the default. It's the user who's going to go do this going forward, and Windows is going to make sure that your application is promoted to the user in context of that action. And it's going to provide that one consistent UI that's predictable from across Windows for them to make that decision going forward. It also means that you don't have to spend time actually making a lot of the file type association or protocol decisions within your installer or within your applications. Windows is taking that burden on going forward. Simply by creating the declarations as part of your app manifest, Windows will make sure that not only do you show up in that UI I just showed you, your application also gets shown in the control panel where the user can also go set defaults for all these file types, protocols, or AutoPlay. As a result, you may not need to provide any UI within your application, but if you do need to be able to link to that control panel, that capability is still preserved in Windows 8, where from your application you can send the user to the control panel to change these associations if they want to. So with that, actually, we're coming towards the end of our talk. I'm going to do a quick recap of all the stuff we covered here over the last 50 minutes. I've talked a lot about consistency in the model, right? Making sure that Windows provides that one single predictable experience to the user independent of where they are. We've talked about how we're reducing cost on you, the app developers, from not having to write a bunch of installer code, create additional UI as part of your applications, test that UI, and deploy it. Windows is taking that burden, and we've simplified the model significantly by just leveraging the declaration model for your Metro-style applications using the application manifest to do so. We've also reduced the cost for uninstall because now Windows will make sure that your application gets registered for the right defaults at installation and make sure the registrations are cleaned up when your application gets uninstalled. We've talked about how you can launch other applications from within your application if you can't support a default specific type of file within your application. And we've talked a little bit about what this means to existing applications and the evolution of the file type protocol and association model going forward. Now, in different parts of the talk, I talked about some related sessions that are also going to be valuable for you as part of this talk. There's an entire overview talk talking about web and local data and how to think about that in terms of Metro-style applications. It was a talk provided by Manav Mishra yesterday, so if you haven't had a chance to attend that talk, the session should be available later today if they aren't already. So I'd encourage you to go through that talk just so you can understand the full breadth of the local and web data model for Windows 8. There is the using files, like I mentioned, using the storage APIs to persist file paths, but there is an entire talk covering all of the storage APIs available to you in Windows 8. So there is session 891. That's also super relevant for you to attend if that's a scenario that's of interest to you. And we briefly touched on the NFC scenario from the focus of AutoPlay. There's an entire talk on NFC, both from a hardware and software perspective. If that's a scenario that's of interest to you, please make sure that you attend that talk. I believe that talk happened yesterday as well, so the recorded session should be available to you today. And with that, there's also some further reading. If this is an area that's of interest to you, there is an entire the association launching SDK sample that's available to you from the SDK. site. You can go to the Dev Center and download those SDK samples. There's the File Access SDK sample that's available to you as well. We have a few white papers available to you. Much of what I've covered in this talk, there is a white paper that's already available to you from the Dev Center that's live that you can go access and get into the details of some of my talks. There's also AutoPlay white papers which talk about those content events as well as those device events and go into detail for each one of the languages. If you have any questions, I'm going to be available after this talk to take a few questions. But there's always the dev site where you can always go and participate in the forums. Make sure that if you're asking questions specifically related to this session, that you specify the session ID. That way it'll help us make sure that we can get back to you quicker and know the relationship of the question that you guys are asking. So with that, I'm pretty much done. But I think we have a few minutes to take questions as well. Yeah. Do you mind if you can use the microphones because they're recording this, so it'll be clear.
Is there a way to access the verbs for the current associations, edit, print, so forth?
Currently, no. There is no way to associate the verbs. So are you, to make sure that I understand that question correctly, you want to see what the defaults are currently registered on the PC?
Correct.
No. So there is no way for an application to be able to do that. Since the user is making that decision, Windows will promote your application as it gets installed, and the user gets to make that decision at that time.
Well, the scenario I'm talking about is if we're accessing an arbitrary file, not necessarily something that we're associated with.
Okay.
And in the traditional registry, there are various verbs for the file type. A docx file may have edit, print, open, or something like that. We like to be able to show those so the user has an option as to what he's going to do. Does he want to edit the file? Does he want to print it? Can we get to that stuff?
Actually, I'm not fully aware of that specific aspect, but that's something that I can definitely look at for you and get back to you on. Feel free to leave me your email address or shoot me an email, and I can get back to that answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Is there a way for the user to see all the file handlers associated to a particular file type?
So the question is there a way for the user to see all the associated applications for a specific file type? Right? Yes, there is the control panel where you can go, similar to what we had in Windows 7, the set user defaults. You can select a specific file type and see all the list of applications that support that. Your application, if you've registered for a file type, should also show up there, and the user can make those decisions. And the other way was how I showed you using the UI through the ribbon in Windows Explorer, where just by selecting that file type, in context, I can just expand the open with verb and see all the registry.
And all file types are still deemed by the file extension, and you said directory. Some cases involve directory.
For AutoPlay, it was the directory, but otherwise, yes, it's the extensions themselves.
That's the extension.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the new UI, when the user accesses the file, asks if you want to use this app as the default.
Uh-huh.
So if you say associate with 5, 10, 15 file types, the user is going to get asked every single time they access one of these files, or are they going to get 15 queries at once?
So depending on the context of the type that the user selects. So let's take the example of MP3 and WMA, where I had that sample application which I registered for both those file types. The user is going to make a decision on a per file type basis. So if I prefer one application to consume MP3 content on because that application is great at it, I can make that decision for that type. But I can consume WMA in a completely different application, and when I try to consume that content, I will get asked a list of all the applications that may support WMA, and I can make a decision for that specific file type.
What if you're the only one that is registered for that type?
Great question. So if there is only one application that's registered for a specific type, that application is just picked by default.
Okay, so they don't get prompted.
Correct. They won't get prompted, but in the future, as more applications get available on that PC for that specific file type, Windows will make sure that we promote your application as part of that experience to tell the user that, hey, there is a new application now that can handle WMA file that you've acquired. Do you want to go use that content in that application? Yeah. Hi.
Yes, I'm wondering, is there a way to launch a file from a stream or passing in a stream as opposed to a file path or a URI?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not aware of anything, but that's another something that I can get back to you on. Yeah, I'm not sure if that can be done through the URI part. I don't believe so, but I can definitely get you more details on it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, either like I can leave you my email address after the talk, or feel free to use the Dev Center I talked about, and we'll make sure we get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then second question, to do the MRU list, do you have to have more permissions set for your application?
So if I am not mistaken, just using the file, the storage APIs, you're going to be able to just call that API directly as long as you have the file handle, the storage handle to that file, and you should be able to add it, and Windows will maintain it for you. But again, I'm sorry, I'm not the expert on those specific APIs. That talk I mentioned there in the middle is like the perfect talk to get the details on that stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Let's say your application is a generic container type that handles all file types.
Okay.
And you get this container and it has a file type that there are no associations with it. And you want to open it, say, in just Notepad.
Got it.
Okay. Is there a facility from within the Metro app to be able to say, open this with Notepad?
So what you can do in that specific case, if there's no file type shown for that specific type, you will get the generic file type. The UI will be the same. I don't know if I showed that specific path, but even in the MP3 example, what you saw was the two file types that were registered for that association showed up. There was also a see all option that would have showed me all the other applications similar to what we had today in Windows 7, where I could go navigate to Notepad if I wanted to open up something in Notepad.
One instance of that would be like text files that are like, sometimes they're called logs, sometimes they're called lists, sometimes they're called, whatever.
Right, and in that specific case, if there's no default handler for that type, you will just get that see all list open by default, and you'll be able to choose Notepad from that.
And is that going to set the default, or just that one instance?
That should set the default for that case as well.
Okay, is there a way not to set it as the default?
Oh, got it. So there is the option from that Explorer UI where there was the checkbox. So you can choose to uncheck that and make sure that you keep getting asked from time to time.
Now, I didn't see where you would register your app as being able to open a type versus being able to edit a type. So, I mean, if your app opens and edits versus another app that just opens or views, can you register specifically like you could before for open and edit?
So for AutoPlay you can, because it would be based on the verb and you can specify that as part of your verb, but for file types, no, you can only specify for the file type extension, and as a result, if you become the default, then you're handling that default. So anytime, whether the user's intent was to open that verb or edit that, open that file type or edit that file type, they're going to be taken to the default. Now, one way for the user to make that decision was that example I gave for the picture file, where by default I always want to open it up in the picture viewer, but this one instance I may want to edit it, and so using the Explorer UI, using the ribbon there, I can make a decision on a single case basis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and a lot of times what we've noticed also is applications do the right thing. So this is where if my application only provides the open ability, there is some UI within my application which can also allow an edit, and it will bring up those default handlers or that list to ask the user saying, hey, how do I want to edit this file type kind of thing, and the user can choose for that specific instance as well.
Hi. Oh, I've got a dozen questions, but I'll keep it to one or two.
Okay.
How do you specify the icon for the file? You're specifying the icon for the application?
So
for example,
the way you
Word
specified
20.
that icon for the file was that image field that we filled in the declaration. So that's what's used for the icon for that file.
For the file or for your application when opening the file?
So for the application, you're specifying it as part of the manifest in a different tab. When you're specifying the file type associations themselves, the image for that specific file type association we're doing is the icon for that file type.
But is there one per extension? Because there seems to be only one for all extensions.
No, so what I could have done there, for that example, I just used one for all and specified multiple extensions to use the same icon. I could have specified multiple file type extensions, declarations, with each one having a unique icon for itself as well. Yeah.
The other question is, I think it may have just been a demo thing, it seemed when you opened the MP3 file, it opened the application and then told the user there were alternatives.
Correct.
So that's fine if my application is a nice fast Metro one, well, what if it's Photoshop? It's going to take 10 minutes to start up, and then I wanted preview.
So from a timing perspective, I'm not really sure where that would happen, but that is the intention. The user in the past has told us that they want to consume this content in this specific file type, in this specific application. We want to respect that association the user has told us, but still want to promote a newer application that's available.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm wondering that launch default program for file kind of thing, would that gonna, other than the file path or the URI, would that accept any command line parameter too?
No, as far as I know, that doesn't. All it does is the two options that are available to you is to launch it in whatever the default handler is, or show the user a UI asking them which one of those applications they want to launch it in. Okay. So currently it doesn't support. No.
Is there any plan to support it?
So no comments on that. But that's where the Dev Center and the feedback tools are super important to us. That's something. If that's something that you're interested in, please make sure you send us that feedback so we can start looking at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So is there a way to specify not just a single icon for all of the files of the type, but to provide some kind of preview? So suppose like a raw camera file or some specific graphic format that only my app understands. So rather than showing a generic icon, I want to show a thumbnail for that file. And my app will generate the thumbnail.
So Windows, so today if you're registered, like I know in the case of media types, for example, MP3s, even though I didn't have a default registered when we started off the demo for MP3 files, Windows does do some extraction for some basic file types. I'm not sure on file types that are very specific to your application on what the model there is, but that's something definitely I can get back to you. Like that's not an area of expertise for me on how they go about doing that. So feel free to send me an email and I can make sure that we get back to you on that part.
And secondly, is there a way to launch a different app for a file that doesn't yet exist? Like for instance, I am an email application and I want a user to create a JPEG that is going to be attached. So I would like to launch an image editor and the editor to create an image file at this path and I'll consume it later.
Not sure I understand the question.
Well,
Sorry.
like for instance, if I launch a Notepad and I give it a path that does not exist, Notepad right now will tell me, okay, this file does not exist.
Sure.
Do you want to create it now?
Sure.
So the file is created. Once the Notepad exits, my application can consume this text file. So is there a way to do a similar thing from a Metro app?
No, I don't believe there is a way to do that specifically for Metro app because I think you have to provide a valid storage item to do so. But that'd be great feedback to provide if that's something that's of interest to you. And also that the storage API that I talked about is the one that goes into the deep into those specific aspects of the storage items and how to play around and handle with those as well. Yeah.
I've been looking for documentation for quite some time for a lot of these kinds of features, and on, I think, your last slide, you said here's the SDK for file storage, and I can't find it.
Oh, the file access SDK sample?
So I did a Bing search for file access SDK sample. Nothing. Windows 8.
So
I'm
what
not
you
able to
should
find
do
where
is
it's at.
the dev site, the new Windows 8 dev site that's went live when build went after the first day.
dev.windows.com?
Yeah, there is actually a tab there called samples, and it has a list of all the samples because all of those went live after the keynote on Tuesday.
Okay.
And so you should be able to find it there.
Okay, thank you.
And if you don't, definitely send us mail and we'll make sure we get that to you.
Alrighty.
All the PowerPoints will be available. So the build site, actually, I remember checking it this morning. The site for all the sessions that have already happened, you've already started to see the videos and the decks and stuff show up there.
I was in the session this morning on the file picker, and it says that when you have your app and associate with the various types, those are the types that show up in the file picker when your app wants to open something.
Correct.
Okay. What if your app is a container type that wants to consume all file types? How do you get the file picker to say, I want to see everything, all files?
Definitely not my area of expertise, so I apologize I can't answer that question. But the file picker, the folks on that specific talk, their names and stuff will be live as part of that talk. That's something definitely they can get back to you. If not, you can shoot an email and I can make sure that I get back to you on that.
Yeah, I talked to him this morning and he didn't know how to make it see all the files. It just said if you're associated with it, those are the ones that show up
Got
in
it.
the picker for you. So
Yeah, no. So I can, when we go back to Redmond, we can make sure at least we get the right
I
folks
just hope
to get
it's
in back.
possible. That's
All
all.
right.
All right. Thanks.
But again, like I said previously, like that's great to use the feedback tool and be able to give us that feedback so we know that's something that's of important to you as well. Thank you.
Hi. So we currently create file associations during execution. Can we do that as well, rather than in the manifest?
Sorry, can you repeat that part?
Can I actually create a file type association during execution, rather than doing it in manifest?
No, I believe it has to happen in the manifest going forward now.
And what about I hate to say the word legacy, but a legacy application, can it still do all the things it used to in creating FTP on the fly?
With the guidelines that we talked about, where we talked about what the impact of this model is to existing applications, no, the answer will be going forward, it's the user who's going to be able to do that. That white paper I have listed there, the third one, actually goes into details towards the last half about what the impact is for existing application and what this model means to them and how they should start thinking about these API sets going forward.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Right, I'm 5 minutes over, so I'm going to end here. But feel free to come by or later. I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be part of the booths starting from 1 to 3:30. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to find me there. We have that Dev Center link. Feel free to send us feedback and any questions you may have, and we'll make sure we get you the right answers back. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate your time.